Hi, and welcome to episode number 58 of the ChessTDD series. I start off this episode doing a little bit of reconciliation of the Trello board, and then I sort of, in a nod to symmetry, bookend the episode with a little bit more of the same, but I'll get to that later. The charter here is to implement this second checklist item, which is so we built this threat evaluator to tell us whether or not a piece is threatened. And the thing we then want to do is actually integrate that into something that matters. So it's going to matter in two different places. And what you're watching here was just kind of me remembering how all this worked, because even though I didn't apologize, it has been a little while since I've recorded the last episode. I've been cranking on my other series, the GitHub scraper, so check that out if you like. So at any rate, I was reminding myself here kind of what's going on, and then I said, okay, so we have sort of three distinct items, and I decided to break those into three different Trello cards. What I didn't really notice, for some reason in my mind, the things I don't like but will worry about later columns were transposed. So I'm looking at these things but I'll worry about later, thinking that's like my to-do list and that I don't really care about those. And by the way, why don't I have this here? Now, turns out I think I've been doing this for a few episodes. Maybe I've switched this in some other boards I'm using, and I ought to transpose them here or something. But anyway, if you look over to the left, you'll see these exact cards already exist. So a little bit of redundancy there. I guess those are the types of inefficiencies that you incur when you work on things only sporadically. All right, so as I get down to business here with what I'm actually working on, I'm kind of going through here and trying to figure out what the next test I want to write is. And after a little bit of looking at the class to get back up to speed, figured out that I think the first thing I want to start with here is a outside-in approach. I want to articulate what it is I'm trying to do visually in these feature files, and I don't think that's going to be terribly difficult because of the pretty visual nature of this particular thing that I'm working on. I'm going to set up a board with a rook I should say two rooks and a king on the white side, and then put a threatening piece in on the black side and say, this move should be restricted in this case. So what I'll do is, in this case, write an acceptance test that expresses the deficiency I have in mind, and then I will recreate that same scenario in a unit test. Now, as you've seen over the course of time, there's certainly evolution to be had here in the interplay between acceptance tests and unit tests. And in this project, and in actually a few others I've been working on, I've incorporated the learning over the last year that I've done here into other projects. The interplay between automated acceptance tests and automated unit tests and your test-driven development is always going to be a subtle thing. There's a good bit of subjectivity to this. But I will say that what I've evolved to kind of like is to favor an outside-in approach wherever I can. So if I can easily express this in terms of the value that some user gets out of it, then I will. I'll go and I'll write that test first and let that kind of drive the more granular test that I write. But at other times, you'll maybe be working your way towards some refactorings, or you'll have architectural concerns or something that you're addressing that don't really have a component like that. And in those cases, I'm perfectly content to go with the inside-out approach. A lot of people seem to really favor one or the other. I'm very context heavy when it comes to this. So anyway, back to what's going on here. To narrate a bit, I'm actually trying to remind myself where the test I want to use is. What I was looking for is unit tests related to castling around board, and then after a while it dawned on me, oh right, I pulled out this whole other class and concern to handle castling, so I am looking in the wrong place. It is actually here in castling status checker tests. So this makes my life nice and easy. And what I do next is a bit of yak shaving, but as I was scrolling through these tests, there was a comment that I got in either YouTube or my blog, I forget which, about and I was looking for, I thought I added a Trello card for it, but maybe I didn't, or maybe I just added it somewhere that that doesn't make sense to me anymore. But what he had said astutely was that there are all these tests that have like 7-1 or whatever in the name, 3-1. And he was saying this is a smell in terms of the naming because of exactly what I'm doing here. Nobody cares about the actual coordinates. It's what they describe. So his point was that when I was replacing the magic numbers with the descriptive constants, I should have also done that in the test names, and I fully agree. So what I started doing by way of yak shaving was just going through and doing that. Now, I made a critical practice/theory mistake here as I was doing this. Can you spot it? Something I've harped on plenty. Nobody is perfect, including me, obviously, but I got distracted, and what I didn't think about was that I had a failing red acceptance test as I was doing it. Now, what I will say is the risk here is pretty much nil, because in this refactoring, which is what it is, renaming test methods, has absolutely no bearing on production code and is about as cosmetic as it gets. That said, it is still not, if you are doing this to learn TDD, this was a shortcut I took. I cut a corner here. I didn't even realize it actually till I was narrating this, but that just goes to show you that, you have to be pretty vigilant when it comes to mistakes. And here it didn't bite me in any way, but I've had instances, over the last however many years where, in spite of being pretty well practiced at this whole approach, I do something like that and it bites me. It introduces a second failing test, or it changes the reason that my test is failing, and suddenly the result is confusion. It's not that you've angered the test-driven development gods or something. That's not the point. The point is, if you're going off doing some yak shaving when you have a red test, you don't actually wind up knowing if the things you're doing are breaking things more or breaking things differently or what have you. You are going from a situation where you had isolated one problem that you needed to solve to doing multiple things in parallel, either one of which could be explaining what you're doing. If you're thinking of it in terms, in like scientific terms, if you're running an experiment, you no longer have a control group and an experimental group. You've introduced a third group. So, your experiment starts to lose its meaning, I guess, is how I would put this. So yeah, that is a lesson to take away there. Do as I say, not as I do, but mostly as I do, just not in this case. Okay, so anyway, back to the present, both in the video and in terms of what I'm talking about. What I want to do here is just recreate, I should say, the exact scenario that I created in the acceptance test, but here in a more narrow focus, specifically on the class where it's going to matter, rather than getting to it through 2 or 3 classes the way I would in the acceptance test. So I take the well, it's not quite exactly the same because this class's context has 2 black rooks in addition to the black king on the other side, and in the acceptance test I just introduced the black queen, but in terms of what we're exposing here, it's the same difference. So I'm putting this queen there who I know is going to threaten a move that the castling king would have to make, or is going to threaten a square the castling king would have to move through. So I know that that move should not be available there. Now I set about making that true, and I kind of look at this and say, okay, we've got this method here where I'm introducing a path maker to get my path, and I'm using that to calculate the spaces between the king and the rook. Now what I want to do is instantiate this threat evaluator, and and then take each of these spaces and say the king would be threatened if there's any spaces here that are threatened by anything. So, and that's what Threat Evaluator does. It takes a board, and then I can give it this space and tell it which player's piece I'm interested in doing the threatening, and it'll tell me if there are any threats to this space. So Threat Evaluator, Detector, I'm using that kind of interchangeably because it's been a while, but do want to be consistent about the naming. So what I'm going to do here is say, yes, if there are any spaces in, or if any of these spaces between the king and the rook are threatened, I want to have this would king be threatened Boolean local that I can use as yet another conditional in that return at the bottom, where I'm either giving back nothing, or if all of these conditions are met, I return move if success. Man, there are some things here I think that could use a bit of refactoring, but almost certainly I will look at doing some of the major ones. I kind of want to get to the point where we've implemented all of the standard chess moves, and then I'll probably write a whole bunch of acceptance tests, different scenarios of board to suss out any bugs, get those passing, and then call it on the series, and probably actually build, as I've mentioned before, some kind of product where I'll go through using NDepend and some other static analysis tooling to evaluate problems and maybe show how I would factor them. And so is in essence bonus material for this. Okay, so what I was doing here is I saw that when I introduced this, I was getting this null reference exception in some of my tests. So what I did there is just to make sure I was understanding it right, that piece was the thing that could be null. I replaced that with a false, and I watched the null reference exception go away. So that's why I'm doing, sorry, I got off on a tangent. That's why I'm sort of moving this piece null check up to the top. So that's going to get rid of the null reference exception. Now I'm going to go here and say, okay, we also don't want to return anything if the king would be threatened. Now I have 12 failing unit tests. Why? See, it was because I wasn't maybe correctly reasoning about, I'm going to say it's not a first player piece. I think the name of that argument to is threatened is somewhat confusing. It's like is first player piece. So I want to say that, or is first player attacking. I think it's not so much about who's attacking, but whose move it would be in the scenario that we're modeling. And that's a subtle but important distinction. And I don't remember if I renamed it or not. Maybe I made a mental note to do it, and I hope I did, but I might have forgotten. So as I'm looking at that, when you're talking about this, so we're not actually like encapsulating the concept of turn per se. So is first player attacking versus is first player's move, I guess, could be two different things. Like, anyway, I think it could use a better name, and hopefully I'll look at tackling that here in the future. Again, in terms of mentioning the video product I'm going to create later, I'm almost 2 years into it, so I want to wrap up this series. I am deferring some things for that potential series that I might actually be cleaning up as I went here, but I just, I've been at this for a long time and I don't want to draw it out over much. So what I'm trying to do is get something shippable, and that actually kind of simulates what'll often happen to you when you're working on actual projects. You try to keep things relatively clean, you make some concessions, and then you buy yourself some breathing room later. But I am buying myself a little more breathing room than I normally would. I'll make it a point to go back in and keep things clean as I go, even in projects that I'm working on, towards doing a little bit of it for free without being billable, just because not having the code the way I wanted sort of drives me nuts. So you're not seeing quite as much of that, just because I want to wrap this up. And I also want to have maybe a bit more of a compelling set of content towards, what I'm doing. I mean, this isn't legacy code that I'm creating exactly, but it'll be a little bit more interesting to give this a flavor of here's, how I'd clean up some things that I saw in a code base and needed a bit of tender loving care. Okay, so back to the present. What's happened was I introduced something that you'll see. I had 2 failing tests, got down to 1, and in fact, neither of the new tests I'd written was failing. There was another acceptance test that was failing, and what it turns out is happening here, and this is going to be the source of a decent amount of pain, is this interplay between board, castling status checker, and threat evaluator should be unidirectional, but because I have these dependency cycles and coupling, it is creating some confusing logic. What is happening is that when I am determining threats, it is not taking into account the concept of blocked pieces. So basically, when I'm saying does square attack here, what was happening in the acceptance test is the king was being prevented from moving, even though a pawn was in front of the king and preventing the queen on the other side from threatening that square. But this particular class, the threat evaluator, is not recognizing that because the concept of blocking occurs in board. And right now I'm saying, okay, does the piece exist? Is capture allowed for this piece and this particular victim? Is the move we're interested in the opposite of the color of the piece being attacked? Great. But I am not capturing the logic of the actual blocking, which is right now a concern of board. So I'm looking at, what is the best way to handle this? Could I call into something else? Should I just say that I want to use the get moves from member of board? So that's where you're kind of, I'm hopping around through this code because it's a little bit confusing, and I'm trying to think of maybe the best way to handle this. I think what I settle on is to say, all right, well, let's just add another conditional in here that not only does capture need to be allowed, but it's actually one of the moves. If I ask the board, what moves does this, are there from this square? It needs to be one of them. So, okay, that'll take care of the blocking concern here, which it would, but watch, something interesting is going to happen. I sit there momentarily waiting for it. It will take a minute. I don't know if you've been following this closely enough or if it's even possible to know off the top of your head what the problem with this scheme I'm introducing is, but you'll understand fairly quickly here. So it's kind of churning, cranking, and now all of a sudden I'm seeing these red X's, even though NCrunch isn't evaluating, and NCrunch has detected a stack overflow. And then it hits me. Board.getMovesFrom is calling the castling status checker, which is calling is threatened and does square attack, which is now then calling getMovesFrom once again. So there you have it. The circular dependencies, and this is actually an interesting object lesson right here. You are seeing the moment at which the circular dependencies come back to bite me. In architectural consulting kind of things that I do, and earlier in this series, you heard me talk about it is not good to have mutual dependencies between classes, namespace, assemblies, etc. Circular dependencies are the root of a whole lot of pain. And now you are seeing that chicken come home to roost. I said, I'm going to introduce this. It's not great. It was abstract until this moment. Now the pain of that is concrete, where you can, get these stack overflows. You can get these weird problems. It gets hard to refactor. So what I did to fix the problem here is another instance of hold my nose. And that's another lesson. Hold your nose begets more holding your nose. I looked at this board method called isMoveLegal that was doing what I wanted, and it was a private method, but I just promoted it to be public. That is not generally a good thing to do. I consider it to be questionable here. Is move legal is something that the public clients of board actually might well be interested in. So you hear classically in object-oriented programming, don't break encapsulation just to make something testable or just to, get use. That's a hacky thing to do. And that is definitely true. But what I will say here is I didn't just do it because it was the only way I could think of to get this working, but because in my estimation, is move legal, well, we probably ought to put some tests around it now, is move legal is a reasonable thing. It's not a purely auxiliary method. I might want to ask the board for a specific move rather than saying, let me figure out what's at this square and then get all the moves from this square. Maybe I only care about one, so I don't want to say get moves from and then use a lambda expression or use length to see if it's contained there. I just want to know if this one thing is legal. So that is why I did that. All right, so now you're witnessing me do, and I probably could have cut this out, but again, in the spirit of showing everything, you're witnessing me do something kind of dumb that if I just thought through for a minute, I would have realized wouldn't work. So I thought to myself, wait a minute, there's an attacker piece and a victim piece when we're evaluating threats. Why am I passing in this concept of a Boolean for who's attacking? Why don't I just see if the attacker and the victim are pieces of opposite colors? And I somehow managed to go all the way through this without it dawning on me that that the overwhelming majority of times I'd be using this, if not every time, was speculatively when considering whether a piece can move somewhere or not. So, hey, Eric, there mostly won't be any victim piece. Don't do that. So all I did was back this out of here. And at this point, I decided to, because we're pretty far into the episode, 22 minutes or so, just make sure that everything was passing. So all my unit tests are passing. I did a little bit of refactoring here. This is nasty, so I wanted to see if I could extract out a method, but when I went to do this, I saw that the prospective method extraction would require actually 4 arguments. So that didn't seem like too much of a win to me. I decided to just leave this as is for now. Could have introduced a local maybe, but I don't know. Let's see. Now, I just got back over here to do a little bit of Trello board maintenance, and then I started kind of going through. I wanted to make note of, specifically, I wanted to call out this circular dependency problem, because this is getting to the point where it should be fixed, and it might bother me enough that in spite of my threats, only to do this in the eventual product with the extras, I might not be able to resist fixing this because I don't like it. So I wanted to get this in here. And here's when I realized, I had transposed the things on the far left. I had started thinking of the, stuff I'll worry about later. And the things on the nearer left were my to-do list. And this caused me not to realize that there were a bunch of cards in here already for the stuff I'd created. So I was in here doing a little bit of card maintenance. And then I wanted to say, I'm going to worry about this later, but it is sure nasty. Interdependent logic in the board, castling checker, and threat evaluator. And I actually got smart here and made a note as to where you see this specifically, like in the... in terms of the episode, so I can actually go back and watch this problem. So doing a little bit of Trello cleanup, getting near the end of the cards about actual piece movement and whatnot, or piece movement checking. So then I'm just going to go back here in GitHub and, or I should say Visual Studio, and commit this and then push it up to GitHub. And that was it. I think my GitHub credentials timed out or something, but anyway, there's not a whole lot more here. So as always, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for next time. We'll see if we can't take care of that little last bit of check as it pertains to evaluating movement. So see you next time.